Hello, it's Dr. Cindy with this week's Mental Health Moment. Today I'm going to talk about fear and anxiety. When working properly, fear alerts us of an impending danger and primes us to take action to hopefully ward off or escape that danger. When our brain detects a potential threat, it releases adrenaline and cortisol within our system as signals that prepare the rest of our body. This causes our heart rate and blood pressure to increase, our breathing to quicken, and blood to flow away from the heart to our arms and legs to help us defend ourselves or run away. During this process, the logical part of our brain that is responsible for reasoning and judgment is overcome by the more primitive survival part, making it difficult to think clearly and make decisions. So this means we are set up for a quick, reflexive action rather than a planful, nuanced response. And once the perceived danger has passed, it takes a while for our body to return to its more relaxed state. This fear response is intended to be a temporary, short-term physiological process to protect us from harm. But it is really an extreme form of the more general stress response that we regularly undergo when we feel challenged by experiences in our daily lives. Rushing to get to work on time, dealing with financial concerns, worries about a loved one, and a multitude of other situations that we might be faced with can trigger the same chemical responses in our brain and body that tell us to be alert and prepared for action. With enough accumulated stresses and or without direct work on our part to help reset our system and reestablish a sense of security and safety, that stress response may become an ongoing state of anxiety that keeps us vigilant and on guard. Over time, this can lead to a whole cascade of physical, emotional, and behavioral challenges. On the physical side, we might start experiencing headaches, dizziness, muscular tension or pain, restlessness, chest pain, fatigue, exhaustion, stomach upset, loss of libido, and sleep problems, which can in turn lead to a variety of medical issues and health conditions. In addition to anxiety, other emotional reactions to this chronic stress response are feeling overwhelmed, irritable, angry, sad, depressed, unmotivated, distracted, and hopeless. This in turn can lead to smoking, drinking or drug use, social withdrawal, overeating, self-harm, overspending, impaired school or work performance, relationship conflict, decreased exercise, and other behaviors that often exacerbate the physical and emotional toll that we are undergoing. Years ago, I read about an effort to study depression in monkeys. The researchers went into the wild and observed a colony of monkeys in order to find ones that were exhibiting what we would consider to be typical signs of depression in humans. So they looked for monkeys that were passive, inactive, and socially isolated, with those that preferred to keep to themselves rather than engaging in the usual activities of the rest of the group. The researchers then captured those monkeys and took them back to the lab in the hopes of running tests to determine what was causing their depressive symptoms. But once they were in the lab, the monkeys became much more animated, energetic, and social and behaved like regular monkeys. Baffled by this change, the researchers traveled back to the original habitat to see if they could figure out what something they might have missed. By the time they returned there, they discovered that the entire colony of monkeys had been wiped out by the predators that were in the area. That led them to speculate that the monkeys that appeared depressed were aware of the threat in their environment, and their withdrawn and lethargic behavior was a reflection of the emotional toll of living under that constant threat. So the bottom line is that we are not built to live in fear, and it is important for us to develop daily strategies for not only helping our body and brain truly recover from stressful experiences, but also ideally to reduce circumstances that might trigger that response. Given that the stress response is an ingrained survival reflex, we can't necessarily control when it gets initiated in our brain, but we can facilitate it being a short-term, temporary reaction that resolves quickly rather than an ongoing perpetual state of being. If you've ever had the experience of almost falling off of a ladder or another high place, you know that you get a rush of adrenaline throughout your body, and it doesn't immediately stop even though you haven't actually fallen. You can recognize and know that you are completely safe, but that in and of itself cannot make the physical reaction instantly go away. Once released into your body, the adrenaline has to run its course. That can feel very uncomfortable while it is happening, but it's manageable to get through knowing it's a temporary reaction that will eventually subside. In this case, you have the benefit of recognizing that you are actually safe to enable you not to interpret the physical reaction as a sign of continued danger or to engage with the fear reaction in a way that would perpetuate it. However, if you grip that ladder and start thinking, oh my God, what if I had fallen? And then conjure up all kinds of images of yourself lying on the ground with a broken back, being rushed to the hospital by ambulance, well, that flow of adrenaline is going to keep going on much longer than if you say, phew, I'm glad I'm okay. So how we react to the stress response is important for determining how long it lasts. When we engage with it, we are essentially confirming for our brain that there is something to fear. Then our brain will continue to release chemicals to keep us activated and prepared for danger, and we will continue to feel anxious and stressed. I also want to point out that the physiological response of excitement is the exact same as the physiological response of anxiety and fear. The only difference is our mindset about the situation that is triggering that physical reaction. It is the capacity of ours to override our brain's danger signals that allows us to enjoy and even seek out such experiences as scary movies, roller coasters, and skydiving. And you probably know people who say they work best under pressure because for them, it energizes and activates them. I'd like you to try to think about your brain as being similar to a smoke detector. Note that it's called a smoke detector, not a fire detector. It doesn't detect fire, which is an actual danger, but only the presence of smoke, which is a signal of potential danger. In your home, your smoke detector goes off anytime it senses smoke, regardless of whether that smoke is coming from burning toast, a frying pan, or an actual fire. It is the detector's job only to tell you there is smoke, not to determine if there's a fire. It is your job to investigate and find out if there's a fire, then take the appropriate action based on that. If the smoke is caused by burning toast or a smoking fan, you're not going to alert your family, call 911, gather the pets, and race outside. You remove the toast from the toaster or the pan from the stove, open windows and doors, and clear the smoke away from the detector to turn it off. Well, the same process is true for us in relation to our brain. Our brain alerts us when it detects something that could signal danger. And it is then up to us to investigate whether there is an actual danger or if it is just a false alarm. If there is no clear and present danger, it is our job to reset our brain and shut off the alarm. But what we tend to do instead is engage with an alert from our brain as if it is true. We assume that because we feel afraid, we are in danger. Then we do the mental equivalent of a full-out fire response. But since there's no way to extinguish a danger that doesn't exist, there's no real action to take to help us feel like we have eliminated the threat and restored safety. So instead of resetting the alarm, our reaction keeps the alarm active and we continue to live in fear. Worry is the mental activity that keeps us feeling alarmed. It often starts with the words, what if? What if I botch that presentation? What if he breaks up with me? What if the biopsy comes back positive? Because of our ability to speculate, we can project all kinds of possible scary scenarios and outcomes into the future. This happens when that detector goes off in our brain and we go beyond the appropriate investigation of whether there is an immediate threat to address and start to imagine what could happen if a possible threat were to come true. Remember, our brain doesn't differentiate past, present, or future. So when we think about potential or hypothetical challenges, our brain interprets those as an actual concern. Because of that, when we engage with the what if fear in that way, we are essentially confirming for our brain that we are unsafe, and it will release all of those stress hormones to get our body ready for action, and will engage in the mental activity required to figure out what the threat is and what action to take. In order to do its job well, our brain will then present to us the worst possible scenarios so we can best prepare ourselves for the most disastrous outcomes. Because if we can figure out a plan for dealing with the absolute worst thing, then we probably have all of the other bases covered for the less extreme outcomes. Meanwhile, that alarm stays on and we remain activated. Now, sometimes people think that worrying mentally prepares them for things that could possibly go wrong. But worry is only helpful if it alerts us to take action to prevent something that we actually have the ability to influence. For example, if you worry about an upcoming test and the worry makes you study hard for it, then the worry was helpful. But even then, it's only helpful as a signal to assess a situation and take appropriate action. Continuing to worry once the action is identified and taken is no longer productive and can actually be counterproductive because anxiety about doing well can interfere with learning and test performance. We tend to confuse worrying with problem solving. When our brain detects any problem, it automatically goes into the mode of trying to come up with ways to fix it. That works great with something that is actually happening right now to you that you have the ability to influence or change. Let's say you flush the toilet and it's clogged. Your problem-solving brain tells you to use the plunger and voila, problem solved. But many challenges are not that straightforward, and our brain doesn't make that distinction. It will approach all identified problems in that same way, and therein worry is born. Worry is problem solving run amok. It happens when the brain's standard problem solving process doesn't generate a solution that brings resolution. And since it's not resolved, the brain wants to keep thinking and thinking until it finds a solution, and it keeps the concern in active memory to make sure we pay attention to it and will take the necessary steps. Worrying gives the illusion that we're doing something about the perceived problem, because if we're actively engaged in thinking about it, that means we're not ignoring it. So while worry creates a false sense of security that we're taking care of business, it really only creates insecurity as there's no way to resolve what we are presenting to our brain to solve. This creates that perpetual angst and anxiety that ends up taking such a physical and emotional toll. By the way, don't ever ask, well, what else could possibly go wrong? Because your brain will be more than happy to tell you. So let's look at the conditions that are conducive to constructive problem solving versus destructive worrying. Is there an actual problem? What ifs are a good clue about whether something is an actual problem. What if I never find a boyfriend? What if I don't get into a good college? What if I lose my job? Those are all hypothetical situations that will cause anxiety if you allow your brain to work on them as problems to be solved. You will start thinking about all of the possible stressful repercussions of those hypothetical situations, and before you know it, you end up envisioning a nightmare of a future for yourself that was all of your creation. So rather than giving your brain free rein to try to solve an unsolvable problem, stop and ask yourself, what's my real concern? Typically, it will tie in deep down with a desire to feel loved and secure. If that's the case, that's a much better direction for you to focus your attention than on conjuring up horror stories about just how unloved and insecure you might possibly become in the future. Right now is another consideration. Is there something in this moment that is requiring action? If you are awaiting the results of a biopsy, there's nothing that can be done right now to know if you have cancer. If you start trying to figure it out anyway and think about what the results might be, you are only speculating. That will create worry and anxiety as your brain then tries to anticipate and prepare for all of the scenarios that might ensue. In contrast, appropriate action in the moment would be to provide comfort to yourself about the stress of the situation instead of adding to the stress. Or if you are thinking about an upcoming presentation that you have to give, appropriate problem solving is identifying if there's anything you can do right now to prepare for it and then going ahead and taking that action. Once you have created the presentation, there's nothing else to think about because you have taken the steps you need to address the situation. If you start imagining how the presentation might go, you are no longer operating in the here and now and are opening the door to worry. So if your brain tries to go there, tell yourself, I'm all set. That can help turn off the problem-solving mode because you are essentially communicating to your brain that the issue is taken care of. To you, is the feared situation going on in your life happening to you, or is it about someone or something else? If it doesn't involve you, no amount of mental activity on your part can resolve that situation. Worrying is not the same thing as caring. You can be a support to the person, you can give ideas or advice if they're receptive to it, and that is generally all you can do pertaining to a problem that isn't yours to fix. Parents in particular struggle with this a lot, as it can be difficult to stop worrying about a child because we don't like feeling helpless to make things better when someone we love is going through a difficult time. But there's nothing magical about worrying. If worrying resolved problems, there would be no problems. And not only does worrying not solve problems, but it makes challenging situations feel even harder and undermines our capacity to cope effectively. And if we're actively anxious and worried on someone else's behalf, that makes us less able to support them in the ways they might need. Worrying is not a coping strategy. After looking at whether the thing you are concerned about is an actual here and now situation that is happening to you, the final thing to consider is there something you can do to change it? If someone you love is struggling with cancer, that's certainly a real present moment situation that could adversely affect you, but it is not a problem that you can solve. So if your brain puts energy into thinking about that person's illness, wondering if their treatment will be effective, and projecting about the possibility of them dying, that will create more anxiety because there's nothing you can do to cure their cancer. The only meaningful action to take would be to comfort yourself through your sadness and grief. Make sure you connect with and spend time with that loved one. The COVID situation is a larger scale example of this. It is certainly a real current problem that is affecting everyone's life in a variety of ways. But none of us individually can resolve this public health crisis. And it is important to find ways to establish safety and security for ourselves so that we don't live in ongoing fear until the virus goes away. Taking the necessary precautions to keep ourselves healthy is appropriate action. And if you are healthy and safe right now, then that's where your thoughts and energy should be directed. Imagining what might happen if you or a loved one contract the virus, getting angry at others for not wearing masks, worrying about how many people get vaccinated, or becoming preoccupied with how much longer we will have to deal with this concern will not bring resolution to this problem and will only cause more anxiety and fear. In many anxiety-provoking situations, we are less worried about the actual dreaded outcome than we are about how we think it would feel to experience it. For example, when we're nervous about botching a presentation, there is usually no actual negative outcome and certainly no danger or harm that would come to us. But the potential for embarrassment seems intolerable, especially when we envision all of the possible ways that might happen. What if my mind goes blank? What if people can tell that I'm nervous? What if I sound stupid? With enough energy and time put into that type of thinking, the potential for those challenges to actually occur seems greater and greater, which then makes us feel even more afraid of giving the presentation. And while we are playing out those difficult scenarios in our head, we are actually creating the exact emotional experience that we're afraid of having. And as we're feeling how embarrassing that would be, we become even more concerned about embarrassing ourselves. I would argue that if you're really concerned about feeling embarrassed, it is best not to engage in thinking that conjures up those feelings of embarrassment. So while we think we are preparing ourselves for the emotional hit of a potentially difficult situation by worrying and thinking about how bad it would feel, what we are actually doing is inducing the very tough feelings that we're concerned about in the first place. And when we wait for the other shoe to drop, we are keeping ourselves in an anxiety state rather than allowing ourselves to physically and emotionally recover and rejuvenate. In my experience, there is no way to truly spare ourselves emotional pain when something upsetting happens. What we can choose is whether or not we prolong that pain. We amplify our distress both by prematurely inducing it beforehand and by dwelling on it and agonizing over it afterwards, rather than just experiencing it as it happens. Sometimes people tell me that they don't want to think things will work out because then they will be disappointed if they don't. They would rather be pleasantly surprised if things turn out okay when they weren't expecting them to. And yes, it is disappointing when things don't work out for us, but that's true whether or not we expect them to. The problem in that scenario is you've then made yourself feel bad, potentially for no reason. Similarly, if you expect the worst and then get the worst, you end up feeling bad twice. Conversely, if you expect the best and get the worst, well, you'll end up feeling bad once. And when you expect things to turn out okay and then they do, you don't have to feel badly at all. When people think about something particularly challenging or traumatic that they're worried about going through, they often say, "Oh, I would never be able to handle that." To which I say, of course you would. We often underestimate our capacity to handle things, not recognizing that people can and do handle incredibly painful, stressful, traumatic situations all the time. Handling something does not mean having no emotional pain about it. So how can you disable the stress response when an anxiety-provoking thought enters your mind and sets off the alarm? Step one, tell yourself it's a false alarm. If you are not in clear, immediate danger, then there is nothing to be afraid of in that moment. Step two, turn down the heat. Make contact with your heart. Engaging your heart puts it in charge rather than your brain, so you can hopefully prevent that spiral of automatic thoughts that would typically kick in and keep the stress response going. Step three, clear the air. Take some deep breaths, filling your lungs and emptying them. Inhale stress wherever you feel it in your body and blow it out when you exhale. When you induce a state of calm in your body, it signals to your brain that all is well. Step four, quiet the noise. Connect to the energy of safety and peace in your heart. Imagine it flowing throughout your whole body. Tell yourself you are safe. Everything is okay. And keep doing this until you feel back to a more normal resting state. No matter what the triggering situation or event, we will be able to think more clearly and figure out whatever internal or external action may be warranted once we have first shut off the alarm. Then we can more objectively look at whether there is an actual problem to try to address or if it's more of an internal reaction that we need to attend to. Once you've gotten good at distinguishing a real problem that is worthy of problem-solving activity versus a worry that you need not mentally engage with, you will more easily know where to focus your energy. But in either case, you will want to go through the steps to reduce the fear response so you can access the more logical reasoning part of your brain rather than operating from the primitive survival instinct. We tend to look outside of ourselves for external circumstances to bring us peace, rather than recognizing that it is up to us to establish peace. That's why those unwanted scenarios are so disturbing because we see them as a threat to that peace. But everything doesn't have to be right in the world in order for us to feel all right in our world. And when anxiety arises, that's really just our brain wanting to know whether or not we're in danger. So it's not our brain's job to tell us that we are okay. It is our job to tell our brain that we are okay. And then we get to decide what to do with the worry thoughts that our brain brings to us. Now, if we become chronically entrenched in responding to what-if ways of thinking from a place of fear, it is going to take some time to undo that habit. But when we engage with those thoughts by using the logical, rational part of our mind, rather than the reactive, fear-based one, that can change the level at which we process the concern. When we are actively in fear and our what-ifs are creating worst-case scenarios and disastrous outcomes, there is no reasoning with our brain because it is truly being irrational. And there is a kernel of truth to most fears, which is what makes those thoughts so compelling and disturbing. Yet if you think about it, more often than not, most situations that we worry about do not actually turn out anywhere near as horribly as what our mind is capable of imagining. When we have quieted the alarm, we can think through our concerns in more realistic ways based less on what's hypothetically possible and more on what's actually probable. Then, when our brain raises a what-if concern, it doesn't have to induce a panic reaction. Instead, we can consider the concern and respond by saying, so what? That essentially communicates to the brain that it's no big deal, i.e., not a danger. Now, your brain may counter with another what if, to which you could answer, oh well. Then you can really take charge by asking, could I handle that? To which the answer is always yes, because we can handle any hardship that we might encounter. It might be difficult, upsetting, distressing, disturbing, and not something that we would want to go through. We can handle challenging experiences. By addressing the what-if thinking in this way, you are essentially facing the worries your brain presents to you and letting it know that there are not dangerous situations happening that we need to feel afraid of. Remember, you can only do this when you are in a calm, balanced space, not an activated, agitated one. And if at any time anxiety arises in this process, stop, make contact with your heart, do the deep breathing, and reestablish safety and peace. Another way to counter what-if thinking is to turn the tables on your brain and present best-case scenarios. So if your brain says, well, what if I fail the test? Counter with, what if I ace it? put energy into that. How exciting would that be? Or if it asks, what if I don't have fun at the party? Come back with, what if I have a blast? Then you can feel excited instead of anxious. Along these same lines, engaging in positive imagery about a situation that is causing stress can help you mentally prepare in a way that helps rather than hurts. Back to the presentation example. Starting several days before the talk, spend time each day visualizing how you would like it to go. Imagine yourself feeling ready and prepared at the start of the meeting. Picture yourself speaking clearly and articulately. Connect with knowing you are confident and capable. That can not only minimize anxiety, but can put you in a much better position to conduct the presentation in that way. Because stress is cumulative, it is beneficial to develop regular ongoing practices for reducing overall arousal that builds up on a daily basis. Mental hygiene to connect with and process challenging feelings from the day can help restore peace and calm. This might include writing down worries and other thoughts that you just can't seem to get off your mind. Meditation, guided imagery, yoga, and breathing exercises can all recalibrate your system, signaling to your brain and body that all is well. And periodically connecting to your heart throughout the day and telling yourself you're okay can be a quick and easy emotional reset. As always, the best intervention is prevention. So taking steps to proactively offset situations that would typically trigger anxiety is much easier than having to work yourself back to a place of calm after the alarm has gone off. That's it for now. Have a good week. Take care.